Welcome to Justice Counts, the podcast that goes beyond the law to what's important to you. Equal justice for all is a guidepost for our nation, but how do we achieve that? Here are your hosts, writer-commentator Bob Gaddy and novelist-attorney Mark M. Bello.
Kim Curry was a radio broadcaster for 33 years in some of America's finest cities, a DJ in different time slots, and the program director of two of America's legendary stations, KTSA-AM San Antonio and Power 96 Miami. Curry was a broadcaster in the days when ownership was limited to 7 AM and 7 FM radio stations before radio's corporate takeover. Creative freedom and owner trust led to huge ratings as a DJ, consistently scoring the highest ratings in his time slot. As program director, Kid Curry led Power 96 to ratings never before seen in the station's history and achieved the most significant cumulative audience in the Southeast United States. In 2005, Kim Curry was forced into retirement from the radio business after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now he's the author of the book, Come Get Me, Mother, I'm Through. You can follow the story of Curry's career and battle with a chronic disease at krcurry.com. Hey, Kim, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it very much. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Kim. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
You gave me a list of questions to ask you, and we've religiously kept to the script. But I wanted to ask you, because the title is interesting. Tell me about the title and what the reference is about.
Okay. It's kind of a convoluted story. When I was a college kid, I was on the local top 40 radio station in Pueblo, Colorado, part-time as Gary Paxton. Now, that was a made-up name that someone just gave to me. As I was going to my first full-time job across the country, I was going to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I wanted to come up with a really cool radio name. And these are the 1970s. I was going to be on the radio at 10 o'clock at night, so I wanted to call myself Night Smoke. So, okay, that's enough. So when I got to the radio station, I walked up to the front door and opened the door, and there was a receptionist and a big guy behind her, and he had big curly hair. And I put my hand out to the receptionist, and I said to her, "Hello, I'm your new nighttime DJ, Night Smoke." And the guy behind her said, "Well, if it isn't Kid Curry." Well, my name is Kim Curry. In the 1970s, you guys might remember a TV show called Alias Smith and Jones. It was a show taken off of the Raindrops Are Falling on My Head. Alias Smith and Jones, Butch Cassidy.
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance
Butch Cassidy, right.
That's right. Well, one of the characters' names was Kid Curry. It was Kid Curry and Hannibal Hayes. And when I was in high school, all my friends used to joke, "Hey, there's Kid Curry." So when the big fat guy behind her says, "Well, if it isn't Kid Curry," I said, "Well, I hate that name." And he says, "Well, I won't sign your check." And I said, "Kid Curry it is."
There you go.
That's where that came from. And believe me, it was the smartest thing ever, because there's only been one Kid Curry on the radio in America, as far as I can tell.
That's wonderful.
So because I was a kid, the nighttime DJ, my job was to collect the high school audience, the high school and middle school audience. Mm-hmm. So at night, at 5 minutes before I was finished with my radio show, I'd take open phone calls and let kids just call in and rip on their school. They could tell a joke about a teacher, rip on a little brother, and I would fire back these crazy comments. And because I was the kid on the radio, when I was finished with that segment and my show was over, I'd say, "Well, that's the end of the show. Come get me, mother. I'm through." And that's where that line came from. And it just seemed appropriate when, because I've said that phrase in many towns in America, and it was pretty important, I thought, to label my first book with that title.
Now, is your book, tell us just quickly about your book.
Well, it's a culmination of my radio career. I was fortunate enough to land a big job in Miami 6 months after my first full-time job. I was only at my first full-time gig for 6 months before I got taken down to Miami. Now, that began a process of working for two of the most legendary program directors in the radio business, Jerry Clifton and Bill Tanner. Those guys, Jerry was the first one who found me. And then due to a crazy contest called Find Greg Austin in the Bermuda Triangle, and this Jerry was the program director of what was 96X. And so we're in Miami.
All before Where's Waldo, right?
Oh, absolutely. And so he got on the radio and they did this promotion, Find Greg Austin. Greg Austin's lost in the Bermuda Triangle. And people actually got in their boats and headed out there. Well, that's illegal. So through all of this process, Jerry Clifton eventually gets bounced out of my first job in Miami. And the competition across the street really liked my radio show. So they captured me. So I went from Jerry Clifton to Bill Tanner, two of the genius radio program directors in America. My book talks about a bunch of the crazy things we did, the contests, the interactions I had with stars, many of them throughout my career.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it was, well, the book is funny. There's, I could just tell the story about the time that my daughter farted in front of Gloria Estefan. And there's all sorts of crazy stories in there. The first interview I ever did was with Bob Hope.
Wow!
So there's a bunch of those kind of stories. Actual stars I ever met were Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis of the Fifth Dimension. And so you got to realize I went into top 40 radio back in 1976. Okay. And when I ended up out of broadcasting in 2005, I'd gone through top 40 radio, but all those different genres of music. Right. When I started, I was playing Casey and the Sunshine Band. When I finished, I was playing Puff Daddy and Tupac. So I went through all these genres of music, and that's kind of where the book begins. Yeah, and then it goes into these crazy things that used to happen to me throughout my life. Exacerbations of what was multiple sclerosis, but I didn't know what it was. Right. Things would happen to me. In fact, there's a story in the book. Stress is a major factor in multiple sclerosis. Our brains get lesions on them. And the stress, when you have a lesion on your brain, the stress inflames that lesion. And that's why my wife won't even let me talk to either of my ex-partners. So anyway, because stress really, it makes my legs freak out. My arms curl up. So stress is extremely important in multiple sclerosis. So I had a radio show in Washington, D.C. At the end of my show, I was doing this little segment called Bed Check, which is Come Get Me, Mother, I'm Through at the end. Now, I had done this feature, Bed Check, in different markets around America, and it was all high school kids, teeny boppers. But then when I was in Washington, D.C., it got taken over by the politics. You'd have one political party ripping another political party. And I'm going, guys, this is supposed to be for high school kids. And these guys are having this fight on my show. And it was crazy. But during all of this, a guy would call and he would say, hi, it's me, Frank DeFramer. I'm over here at the White House. And President Reagan was just in my studio listening to your radio show. He thinks you're funny. And I thought it was a joke. I just kept hanging up on the guy. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah. Well, he kept calling in and saying, well, the president was just here. So I took him off the air one night and I said, listen, man, is this real? And he says, well, my name is Frank DeFramer. I am the person who takes care of the frames of the portraits at the White House. Someone needs to do that maintenance. I'm in the Secret Service, but that's my job. I'm the framer. They call me Frank DeFramer. And so Frank would have this studio in the bowels of the White House. And President Reagan would come in and listen to my radio show. He was an old radio guy, so he got off on me being crazy with people. Wow. So then time goes on. Sure. I'm now working. I've left Washington, D.C., and I'm working in Baltimore. A year goes by or so, and a girlfriend I had at the time, her grandmother came up from Texas. We're having dinner in Baltimore. And of course, the story comes up about Frank DeFramer. And she says, well, if you know somebody at the White House, you better take me over there. I was like, oh, geez. So here I am calling the White House. Now, not really thinking, I didn't even really know if Frank DeFramer was real. He told me these stories. I assumed he was real.
Hello,
So
Frank.
I call the White House, and the lady answers the phone. I'm like, okay, listen, I need to speak to a guy by the name of Frank DeFramer. And she goes, oh, Frank, hang on, I'll be right there. I was, whoa, I got food. So he picks up the phone. He's like, kid, what's going on? Because he was a big fan of the radio show. And I told him my story. I said, I got a grandma here. She wants to come and visit. He says, come on over. Let me know when you're coming. I'll tell the guys you're on your way. Just let them know you're here to see me, and we'll get you in here, no problem. Now, this is after Reagan's assassination attempt. They had not changed the security around the White House yet.
Wow.
So I'm driving around the White House, and I'm looking for an entrance, and I see one that, to me, looks like it goes right up to the back door. Uh-huh. So I'm thinking, well, here I go. So as I'm driving up this road, as you can only imagine, men came out of the woodwork with their guns drawn on me as I'm driving up toward the White House. Now, this starts to do this stress thing in my body. And I start going, oh, no, what have I done? And it really freaked my body out. My arm curled up. I lost vision in my right eye. When they came to me, I opened the door and I fell out of the car and I'm yelling, it's Kid Curry. I'm here for Frank DeFramer. And they're like, hey, kid, what's up? Thankfully. But that stress, that thing that happened to me there is very much the reason why multiple sclerosis is undiagnosed in people until they get under a stressful situation when the body begins to react. Wow. And that's what happened to me 3 or 4 times. I thought one time I'd been bitten by fire ants. I thought I'd been stung by a killer bee, but these were all MS exacerbations.
Wow.
So
hey, Bob,
yeah.
Good luck getting a short answer out of this guy.
Yeah, what I was thinking, that's not even on our script, that question I asked him. And I have no idea. I have no idea if that, wipes out all the other stuff that we're supposed to ask the guy.
Well,
but
I like this much better.
All right.
Yesterday, we spoke to Kim Hamer. We told you this is Kim week.
Kim week, 3 Kim week.
Kim is a woman who shared the experience of losing her husband to cancer at a very young age. And I asked her about the day that she found out about the diagnosis. Well, you're very much alive, thank goodness. MS, as we know, is a very nasty disease. I lost a cousin to it at age 50. I watched her deteriorate until she was gone, essentially. It scares the hell out of people.
Yes, sir.
What was diagnosis day like for you?
Okay. So I had gone through all these different, they test you for everything. They poke, they prod. It takes a couple of months. The end process is them extracting spinal fluid. Because of my severity of MS, I didn't have any spinal fluid. I did 4 spinal taps in one day. The last one, they put me under an X-ray machine to be able to find it before they extract it. So I'd gone through all this testing. Remember, I was programming this big radio station in Miami, but our corporate office was over in Naples. I was 3 hours over Alligator Alley over into Naples at a corporate meeting. And I'm sitting there with all the big wigs, and the phone rings, my cell phone, my 2005 version of cell phone. And I went off to another room, and my doctor said, Kim, I need to see you on Monday because we need to begin planning the next part of your life. To which I was like, excuse me? What? I had no clue even where she was going with the diagnosis because she hadn't said anything to me. And I said, so what do you mean by that? She says, I'm going to officially diagnose you with multiple sclerosis. You need to be here on Monday so we can talk about what you're going to do next.
How old were you at this time?
I was, 2005, I was 50 years old.
Okay.
So you're saying you really didn't have any symptoms, any signs of...
Well, remember, I said that those exacerbations I was having, right around the time of the big tsunami, the first tsunami that we saw on national television, remember, gentlemen, it was around 2004, latter part of 2004, we got to watch that Indonesia be wiped out, cows, animals, houses, everything just wiped out in the tsunami. I was at my mother's house with my wife, and we were on a vacation, and I was watching this. And as I'm watching it, my mother starts looking at my face, and she says, your face is wrong. What's wrong with your face? And I said, well, Mom, I'm sitting here watching what's going on television. It's stressful. And I'm, remember, I'm home on vacation. I'm trying not to think about the radio station. And she says, no, there's something really wrong with you. Your eyes don't look right. Your face looks like it's frozen on one side. And that started happening that year, to the point to where my mother was the one who said, wait a minute, something's going on. You got to go see a doctor. Because I had been complaining about crazy things, but it was not until my mother was the one who around January said, there's really something wrong. You got to go find a doctor. My wife gets me to the doctor. So all these exacerbation things that we talk about, the arm curling, I lost my walking gait. I couldn't walk straight at times. I lose vision in my right eye. This was really happening a lot that year up to my diagnosis. So, yeah, at the time, I was in there because my mom said, you're not right. And that's when the testing began. And for the 2 months of testing, she didn't tell me where she was going until that phone call. So I pack up my briefcase. I tell the guys, I've just been diagnosed with MS. I'll see you on Monday. That was a Friday. I get in my car, and now I'm driving back the 3 hours over to Miami on Alligator Alley. I'm on the phone with my wife. I had no idea what multiple sclerosis was. So you can only imagine the 2005 version of Google, and my wife is on there on the phone trying to figure out whatever she can find out on the internet about MS. And by the time I got home, I learned that what is people die from multiple sclerosis.
Oh, yeah.
What was happening to me was just the beginning of 8 years of a very serious decline. So it was not. And then when I got home, my wife and I basically had decided before I got home. When I got home, she said to me, you realize that we've been on the phone for 3 hours and you've not brought up the radio station. And that was so unlike me. I had a radio show I was very proud of 4 hours a day, but when you're running Power 96 in Miami, the biggest radio station in the Southeast US, it was always on my mind. And she said, for 3 hours, you haven't even thought about the radio station, because I couldn't think about the radio station. I knew
fighting for your life.
I knew it was going on in my body. The doctor said things are going to change as of Monday. And so by the time I got home, I was pretty much convinced I should leave the radio station, because I didn't want to be the hurt. I didn't want to be the thing that caused disruption, which is why eventually I asked to resign. They said I could. And I went off to find out what it was like to have multiple sclerosis for the next 8 years.
You brought me right into my next question.
Okay.
But before I ask it,
yes, sir.
I listened to the symptoms you described, and I'm thinking to myself, he must have thought he was having a stroke. Yes or no?
Yes, sir. I did. I kept wondering why it wasn't happening.
They mirror that. They mirror that.
Yeah. I thought, why isn't it happening over here? That was my only claim was, well, it can't be, because it's not happening in my left side. This is all my right eye, my right arm. So I thought for a while, but the only thing that was obvious to me was it wasn't the left side. So
your father got you started in the radio, right?
Yes, sir. 17 years old.
And listening to you talk about it, it was kind of like your destiny. Explain both experiences. You have this glorious path that gets you into radio and makes you successful in it, and then you're forced to leave it. Talk to me about the emotional highs and lows of all of that.
I'm a radio baby. That means your parents were in the business, and that means it's in your blood. And my father was a 20-year Korean War veteran in the U.S. Navy. He had retired and moved us to a very small little town in Colorado called Canyon City, where there's only one radio station, one high school, public high school. So, it was my blood. So it really got to me. But it took time for me to you got to remember, gentlemen, I was really falling apart. My physical condition was really a concern for me at the time, because I could feel what was going on. For the next 8 years, they're giving me experimental MS drugs. I'm taking solumetrol treatments 3 or 4 times a year just to calm my brain down. So it was very stressful to stop being who I was. And remember, Kid Curry, the DJ, was a famous radio DJ, but when you're Kid Curry, the program director of Power 96 at the time, I was a fairly people wanted to be next to me. But for the next 8 years, the further I got into MS, I went from a cane to a crutch to a wheelchair. More and more people, they didn't want to be next to me. And that was a mental process that took me a long time to figure out. When I left the business, nobody really called. Nobody even really paid attention to it. In fact, one guy was concerned about me all the time. And I'd been in the business for 33 years. It kind of got me. I mean, it really...
Oh, sure it would.
It got me. But the magic of modern science, guys, I was really going down quickly. I was going down hard. When I got diagnosed in 2005, there were only, I believe, 4 to 5 MS medicines. Now you fast forward 8 years. Now there's 8 to 9 MS medicines. And the one that I was on was Rebif. I was on Rebif for about 6 years or so. And nothing, well, maybe 8 years. Nothing changed. I was continuing to fall apart. But the doctor said it was time to make a medicine change. We have a new one. I want to give you Copaxone, and I want you to take large doses of vitamin D. Now, this is the science of it, where my doctor is the one I really feel who saved me. Because not only I was a radio DJ. I used to have my mom get on my radio show all the time, and she would call and she'd have a cold, and she said, well, it could be worse. If I didn't take my vitamin C, my cold would be so much worse, and you better take vitamin C. So I never took vitamins seriously, ever. But my doctor said MS patients don't retain vitamin D in the first place. He believed that there's some connection between large doses of vitamin D and the medicine that you take. For some reason, he believed that it helped the medicine to work better. So for the first 6 months, I've only taken Copaxone. I'm not really feeling a change, but he and my wife harassed me like crazy to start taking vitamin D. I was taking 30,000 IUs a day. I was shoving it down my throat. And 6 months later, my condition leveled up. I stopped with that fingernails down the chalkboard thing. I was always feeling like something was going to happen. I could feel my body but all of a sudden that went away and it just stopped. And so we're talking 2 or 3 years go by and my condition's not getting any worse. It's not getting any better. I'm starting in my mind to start believing, well, maybe I'm not going to die from this thing. And it was quite remarkable because I really thought I was going down. So,
well, how about your wife all the way through? She must have been a rock.
That's one thing I can say. My wife she's Cuban. She is a very smart woman. She was my date at the Grammys for years, gentlemen. But then when our roles had to change, she has since, we took all my money. We moved back to my hometown in Colorado. We took our money and did some fixing and flipping. Okay. We took a couple houses. We danced them up and we sold them. She didn't like the way the real estate people were dealing with her. And she thought, I can do this. So she went out and got a real estate license in no time. Within a year and a half after that, she was breaking statewide per capita ratings, had become a superior real estate agent. And now you fast forward to today, she is a consultant, international real estate consultant around the world. And this whole thing that happened to me, I now say that it was the best thing that happened to me because it got me out of a very, very stressful thing that was going to kill me. It made my wife have to step up. And my wife has taken the banner and she has just flown it high. She's doing well. I could spew about my wife. She's a COO at a company. She does profit loss. She runs companies. She does it around the world. So this whole thing that happened to me was the best thing that happened to me. But
he's a kept man, Bob.
I am. And in my book, I talked about how it costs to be disabled in America. Remember, my insurance company gives me one motorized wheelchair. I can use that wheelchair in my house. If I want to leave, that means I've got to get that wheelchair out of the main part of my home, down a level. And that means I've got to have an elevator that takes it down. And then I've got to have hand controls in my car because I'm trying to survive. So I've got hand controls in my car. I have another wheelchair lift on the back part of my house that gets me out the back part of my house. I live in a 3-story ranch home. We're on a ranch. It's a 3-story home, but I've got an elevator in here that takes me these little seat escalators that takes me to each level. These things are not paid for by my insurance. These things are paid for out of pocket. It costs to be disabled in America, and it is something that I am adamant about, because I see it every day. I live a life. I have, if I could only live on one floor of my home, it wouldn't be very fun.
I hear you.
Yeah.
The MS is a strange disease. I mean, I remember my cousin, who I mentioned, and it affected her whole body. I see you, and your upper body seems to be functioning pretty well.
If you could see my lower,
we don't do this by video typically.
Okay.
But if I looking at you, I wouldn't know you had any kind of disease at all.
Well,
it affected her speech as well.
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to has your speech changed?
Well, here's the thing. You got to remember that my doctor, who I believe in a lot, Dr. Bowling out of Swedish Hospital in Denver, he says that once my condition leveled, and we're talking about 2013, 14, my condition leveled off at that point. So since then, my brain has not been inflamed. He believes that my brain has begun to rewire itself. And I guarantee you that's happened. My voice was gone. Whatever whatever they call this thing, I was a radio guy who lost his voice. I mean, I still can't sing, and I'm not that I can sing for anybody, but my voice really is affected. Some days it's good and some days it's bad, but it has gotten better over the since 2015 or so.
I was going to ask you, I mean, your voice doesn't sound like Radioland, but it sounds like you're certainly capable.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was wondering why you felt you had to quit.
Well, here's what you're not seeing right now is the lower half of my body. Yeah. My legs, as adrenaline runs, as stress begins, my body starts to react. So both my legs are sticking straight out right now. Uh-huh. And just in the conversation with you and me, now, my legs seize all day long. I can't stand up because I can't let go of anything, because if I do, my legs can seize and I crash. So we have a line that MS patients all say, and I'll bet your cousin said it. I look fine till I stand up. I look fine till I stand up. I'm in a wheelchair and I can't get out of this wheelchair. And it is stressful to be on the radio. You non-radio people, it is stressful to be on the radio. It's very hard, difficult. It's a thought process that doesn't stop. And remember, radio stations don't turn off. So when you're the program director of one, you're up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, making sure the guy's doing the right liner. You're there at 10 o'clock at night, at 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's a very stressful thing. And that's, in fact, my doctor will tell you, the first doctor that diagnosed me, Dr. Calagua in Miami, she believed that after 33 years of constant stress, of constant thinking about radio broadcasting, it was always on my mind. She thinks that that's probably where the exacerbations began, because I would work, I would be in the radio station at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning, work all day long. At 10 o'clock at night, go out in Miami and get on a cruise liner to host the big cruise gambling thing, get off the radio, get out of the boat at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then be back on the radio at 6. So I did this for 33 years. And so the doctor believed that I may have stressed myself into this. In fact, she was adamant at the time. And like I said, if you could see what my body's doing from the waist down now, you could see that stress really does get.
But what do you do now? What floats your boat?
I am a writer. Well, okay. First of all, we just moved into this 10-acre horse property. I have 2 daughters who are equestrians. My youngest has her horse here. We have another horse in the property, looking for 2 more. Now I'm doing everything I can. I always tell my wife, my job is to figure things out. I'm going to be involved in this horse property. So I have to have a tractor. I've got a fairly large John Deere 3025E tractor. that I need to do the maintenance around the property. I also have to groom the arena for the horses. I have a zero turn lawnmower, which I do because I can drive the zero turn with my hands. Everything here, I'm trying to do as much as I possibly can, but fortunately I have a brother-in-law who can do all the things it takes to stand up, and he really helps a lot. But so that's what I do physically, and mentally I write. I'm a writer. I wrote my memoir. The next book I wrote, it was called The Death of Fairness. It's the story of what happened to a small American town and its only radio station after Ronald Reagan rescinded the Fairness Doctrine in 1987. He vetoed the Fairness in Broadcasting Act, and inside that was the Fairness Doctrine, which was the rule that required equal time for contrasting points of view. I think once that rule went away and you no longer had the right to go call a liar out as a liar or call disinformation out as disinformation, you open the door to people who spew with no debate in their facts. And I believe that's why we've got a lot of the division we have in America today. So that's what that book is all about.
Are there hobbies or therapies that you have to?
I do all the time. I have a recumbent bike downstairs. I use my legs as much as I possibly can because I can't push them or use them, but I can use my arms and my recumbent bike, which gives me physical ability. In fact, I've lost 15 pounds in the last year and a half just because I stopped eating crap. And I've started working out more. I'm trying to stay on the planet as long as I can. My hobbies.
Your website says you wrote a novel. Is that right?
I do. I have another one, my third book, which is Bonnie's Law: The Return to Fairness. Now, this is the same story. It's just, okay, now I took the Death of Fairness and sent it off to a company known as Tailflick. Now, Tailflick looks at projects to go shop them off in Hollywood. Tailflick sent my first book, The Death of Fairness, back and said it needed a deeper story, needed more character development, et cetera, et cetera. So I changed my thought process, and I wanted to write the same kind of story about the death of fairness, but I wanted to write it for a young person, a young woman who might read the story and think, wait a minute, at one time we were at a place in America where you could call a liar out as a liar and get equal time. And then she wants to bring this thing back. She fights to go back to the days of the Fairness Doctrine when lies were made legal without debate. So that's the second book, is about a little girl who figures out all the stuff that needs to be heard about Reagan and him vetoing the 1987 Fairness in Broadcasting Act. And she figures out that it's the Fairness Doctrine that has actually put her in a wheelchair. She's in a wheelchair. And she believes that the Fairness Doctrine is a direct result of her being in the wheelchair because of the storyline that I wrote. So I'm adamant about this story about the Fairness Doctrine, and the reason is simple. My dad got me into radio. I went off on my big radio career, and I kept coming home on vacation. And my dad would say, you know what, man? They just fired Al Madrill, and they put some syndicated radio talk show on there, and the guy does nothing but lie and cause trouble. And it's going to cause trouble in my town. And then I'd come home again 6 months later and he'd say, you know what? They fired the afternoon guy now and they got another one of these guys. So my hometown radio station was run by a bunch of local guys, my dad and a bunch of his friends and guys who everybody in the community knew. Eventually, all those guys were fired and replaced with syndicated talk shows that were leaning very much toward the right. And it really bothered my father because he thought it caused disruption in the hometown. And that's kind of where I based this story on, because it did cause disruption in my hometown. There was only one radio station, and there were a bunch of towns in America that had only one radio station that had this constant drumbeat of negativity and lies. And that's, I believe, again, part of why we are in the division we are in America today.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So what's next for you?
I'm going to continue pushing Bonnie's Law. I got my review back from Tailflick. I sent this back off to Tailflick, and they're going to continue trying to find a place for it, because there's all sorts of broadcast media out there that need content. So they're going to continue.
What is that company called?
It's called Tailflick. T-A-L-E-F.
Tailflicks?
Tailflick. F-L-I-C-K. T-A-L-E-F-L-I-C-K. Tailflick.
Okay.
and they're seasonal. I mean, they take stuff and then they don't take stuff. And it costs to submit your stuff. But I can tell you that the 2 times I've paid for it, I get back more than what I expect.
My podcast is typically about justice and injustice. And it strikes me that a disease like MS is so random. People float through life and never experience a serious illness. Some get ill later in life. Some get ill early in life. Some get terrible symptoms. Some are in remission for a long time. Have you ever wondered why me? Did you ever ask that question and bitch at God or something like that?
Well, I can tell you that there was a lot of that for a while. I'm not a religious person. I found it more scientific than I did a personal attack. I mean, I could see that there was something wrong with my body. I'm more the kind of guy who, and my wife is a very positive person. When you're a coach, when you're a life coach and a business coach, you come up with positivity. And there came a point as I was struggling with nobody, everybody's paying attention to Kid Curry, then suddenly nobody cares about Kid Curry. It really bothered me for a while. And my wife said to me one time, you got to stop being mad about being in that wheelchair. And then, you know what, something clicked in me. When Kid Curry used to walk as the DJ into the room, all the little teeny bopper girls loved it. When Kid Curry, the program director of Power 96, walked into a room, all the radio guys wanted to be talking to him. So all of a sudden I thought, you know what? When I roll into a room in a wheelchair, I'm once again the focus. So why don't I just start being me? Because I'm a pretty positive, outgoing radio DJ. Just do it from the wheelchair and stop fighting it. So I used to go into rooms leery. I go into rooms and I control them now because I've switched back. I was Kid Curry. I was beat down for a long time. And then my wife said, stop doing that. And I thought, well, now when I go into a room, I'm still the guy who creates the attention. I just do it in the wheelchair. And I start the conversation. I'm the first one to say anything. I smile at people because I control the room just like I used to as Kid Curry. So
now, you know what? This guy, Mark Bello, that we're sitting next to virtually, he told me that I should ask you if you think the Denver Broncos will ever make the playoffs. But he didn't stop there. He wanted me to ask you if you think the Detroit Lions will ever make the playoffs. And my answer to the second question is, who cares?
If you were 70 years old and you had a team that never made the Super Bowl ever, you wouldn't be asking who cares, as Kim will tell you.
And
well, Bello lives in Michigan, and so we can understand why he lives in. You live in Detroit, right, Mark?
I do.
Yeah, so you can understand why he feels that way.
Yeah.
So you're
he had John Elway. I mean, come on.
Well, I actually have a Detroit Lions connection from my hometown. I remember this when I was 10 years old. Not too many famous people came out of Canyon City, Colorado, but at that time, if I'm not mistaken, we had a guy graduate from my high school who went off to college and ended up playing for the Detroit Lions. And I think his last name may have been like Waltman or Walton or something like that. So I remember that from my childhood.
My Denver story is the field goal kicker. Tom Dempsey, with half a foot, kicks a 63-yard field goal and beats the Lions. And I think they were the first. Wait a minute, Bob. I think they were the first AFC team to ever beat an NFC team. That's number one. And number two, only the Lions could lose on a record-setting 63-yard field goal in the last second.
It's only the Lions. Who cares?
But, there's something, Mark, about being a lifelong fan. I told you earlier, my first Bronco game in 1965, I was 10 years old, and Cookie Gilchrist was playing, and we used to say, we were yelling down there, don't be dumb and give it to a crumb like Cookie. But, that I have always been a Bronco fan. I don't care if they're good or bad. I still think they're going to be okay.
Are they making the playoffs or not?
This year? No, it took Peyton Manning a year to get it right too. So I'm going to say it's going to take Russell Wilson a year to get it right too. So.
You do remember the Dempsey field goal, right?
Oh, how I remember the Dempsey field goal, and I don't care about either one of those.
Oh my! Only the Lions. By the way, we have a couple of minutes, and you started to talk about what I consider to be, as a person who represented special needs people, disabled people, Social Security disability recipients, yay or nay, workers' compensation victims. You started to mention accessibility and the ADA, and I would be remiss on a show like this to not ask you where you think the current state of the law is, and whether America has caught up, if you will, to assisting people with special needs better than they had in the past.
No, America fails. I have friends all around the world who question our healthcare. All these things I have to buy, like the 2 wheelchairs that I have, aside from my motorized, the hand controls, the elevators I have around my house, all that is paid for by me. And I used to get a tax deduction. I don't even get a tax deduction anymore.
Yeah.
So it's not fair. It never has been. It never will be, because I think there's too many people who've got their nose up the corporations, and they're lost, and they'll never get back to it because they get so much money. It's just the way it is. So it's unfortunate. It would be nice to hope that this will all change, but it doesn't get any better by the day.
The sad part is those same people created the technology you're speaking about.
Yes, sir.
None of that existed 50, 60 years ago. Now it exists, and so few people have access to it. It's just the word for it is it sucks.
Yeah,
essentially.
Well, listen, I got to say, I mean, this has really been an interesting discussion, Kim. We thank you so much for being with us, and we didn't mention this earlier, but I do a show too. It's called Lean to the Left. I don't know whether Mark mentioned that to you or not, but I'm going to also use this episode on my Lean to the Left podcast. Yeah,
absolutely. He gets a twofer. He gets special guests get the twofer.
Anyway, if you guys haven't done so already, you guys that are listening to this program, you need to check out Mark Bellows' Rip from the Headlines Legal Thrillers. He's got what, Mark, 7, 8 now you've done?
I've got 8 legal thrillers. I've got 2 children's books.
Right. These legal thrillers, he's got quite the hero in attorney Zachary Blake, who fights for justice on all fronts. Mark's legal thrillers are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, Supreme Betrayal, Betrayal at the Border, and now his latest, You Have the Right to Remain Silent.
No betrayal?
No more betrayals. I guess what happened, Dave? Publisher got sick of that. Anyway, for more information about Mark and his books, just check markandbellow.com. Until next time, this is Bob Gaddy for Mark Bellows signing off.
Check out Kim's books too.
krcurry.com.
Attaboy.
krcurry, CURRY.com. Okay. Thank you, guys.